Okay, in this section, I'm going to be reviewing an overview of the art pipeline. And this is basically starting from the left here. We have our DCC content creation tools, and that's 3D Studio Max and Maya, and soon to be XSI. So we work there with the Max files or the Maya binary files. We have textures that we create inside of Photoshop or GIMP or whatever 2D art creation program. And that's where we go ahead and we put together our 3D models inside of these art applications. At this point, we run some scripts that convert the Max scene or the Maya scene into the Gamebryo scene graph. And this process is where the first thing we do is this little circle here where we just basically convert what we find in Max into a scene graph that's kind of a mirror of that in the Gamebryo format. Then we run that through a series of plugins, and these plugins optimize the scene graph. They do things like make the skinning happening faster, to even simple things like analyzing the scene graph itself and giving us any warnings. And at this point, we either export this to a NIF file, which is our primary format, or we go through the iteration of kind of viewing it in our asset viewer or in Animation Tool, and we view it here's our asset viewer, for example. We also have on-target viewers for the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, the Wii, and in this case we kind of go through this iteration process. Where we view, then we go back to the 3D Studio Max thing, we adjust things a little bit, and then we export again and view. And there's this iteration process as we're creating art. Then once we get the art to the point where we like it, we export it to the NIF file. And at this point, the NIF file could go directly into the game. It can be loaded directly into the game, or the NIF file might be exported with animations that are separate, which are KF files or keyframe files. This is usually the case for characters if you have sequences like run sequences and walk sequences and attack sequences, and all these things that get triggered by key presses or joystick maneuvers. All those animations can get separated out into separate sequences called KF files. And in that case, they get brought into our animation tool where we set up all the blending between the different animation sequences, and that blending information gets saved out as a keyframe master file. And then this can go directly into the game from there. As well, the NIF files can be arranged in Scene Designer. So there's another workflow type where if you create a lot of NIF files that are smaller NIF files, and they then could get composited into a larger scene inside a Scene Designer, that gets saved out as called a GSA file. Which is basically an XML text format, and then that can get loaded up by the application into the game. So that's basically the art pipeline overview. One of the biggest things to remember about the art pipeline is that the source art is the very important thing. Over here, the actual .max and .maya binary files are the important things to save. All of this is kind of intermediate, and we make it very hard to actually modify a NIF file once it gets past this exporter point, because then if you modify the NIF file, you've broken this pipeline. So at this point, say someone were to modify after it's exported, the NIF file gets modified somehow outside of the art asset. Then it is out of sync with the art asset, and if somebody tries to go ahead and re-export it again, those changes down in the end of the pipeline are then lost and have to be recreated. So we don't allow that. That's called keeping it a very clean art pipeline. So one of the big warnings that I'd like to just throw forth is just make sure that the Max and Maya binary files are the source art, and they have always got to you've got to keep a copy of those around if you want to regenerate the NIF files. And that's the general overview of the art pipeline.